Hello everyone. Today I want to take a look at the Season 11 melee changes in the finals, with a particular focus on the Riot Shield. I'll also briefly cover the dual blades, spear, sword, dagger, and sledgehammer, but the Riot Shield is where most of this discussion is going to be. At first glance, this patch looks like a standard balance update. Damage numbers are changed, movement values are changed, several of the melee weapons received new mechanics, but after spending time with the update, I think there's more to it. Season 11 changes how melee combat works, which was their intended purpose. Instead of simply buffing or nerfing individual weapons, they introduced two entirely different systems, precision and stamina. Every melee weapon now interacts with these mechanics in some way, but not every weapon benefits from them equally. Before I talk about any individual weapon, it's important to understand what these systems are trying to accomplish. The precision system rewards accurate attacks. When your opponent is in a narrow angle in front of your crosshair, the attack deals full damage. If they're outside of that angle, the attack becomes a glancing blow and deals significantly less damage. It's important to point out that this isn't a critical hit system like a headshot multiplier for an FCAR. You're not dealing bonus damage for exceptional aim, you're dealing the weapon's intended damage for a precise hit. There is no increase in damage for a critical hit, it's just the intended damage of the weapon. The stamina system exists alongside precision. It is for the lunges. Lunges now consume stamina, and if you miss, you have to wait for that stamina to regenerate before lunging again. It's fairly straightforward. Melee players can still close distance, but they have to commit to these engagements instead of repeatedly lunging until something connects. On paper, both of these mechanics are good ideas. Precision rewards accuracy, and stamina discourages reckless movement. These are healthy goals. The problem is that these systems assume that every single melee weapon wants to fight the same way, and that's just not true. Some weapons naturally benefit from aiming directly at their opponent, or aggressively chasing hits. Others don't. No weapon highlights this conflict more than the Riot Shield. The Riot Shield has always been designed about controlling space, approaching safely, and protecting yourself while closing distance. Precision asks you to do the opposite. It encourages exposing yourself in order to maximize your damage. That is the core issue I want to explore today. But before we compare the other melee weapons, let's start with the Riot Shield and look at why these new mechanics interact with it so differently than the rest of the melee roster. But before we start any of that, I think it's important to define what the Riot Shield actually is. The Riot Shield has never been a weapon that wins fights through raw damage. If it was, it would have been a far better melee weapon before these changes. If your goal is simply to eliminate someone as quickly as possible, almost every other melee weapon in the game does that better, and guns will do it better as well. The Riot Shield's strength has always come from something else: controlling space. This is its identity, and every melee weapon has a different identity. The sword, for example, is built around mobility and area of effect damage. The spear controls an area with wide springs. Sledgehammer trades speed for heavy damage and destruction damage. But the Riot Shield's different. Its job is to safely close distance, pressure opponents into giving up ground, and force them to make difficult decisions. It's not very good at dealing damage every single second that you're in front of their face, but it's still creating value by occupying space that your opponent doesn't want to contest. One of the mechanics that Riot Shield players have relied on for a long time, and something that I have relied on for a long time as well, is referred to as bishoping. Rather than walking directly at an opponent with the shield raised, you approach at an angle, keeping the shield between yourself and the enemy, while still having the mobility to pressure them. You're constantly repositioning the shield to block incoming fire, creating space for both yourself and your teammates. This style of movement is what makes the Riot Shield unique. You're not simply holding the block and hoping that the enemy comes to you. You have to manage your positioning and angle and you have to move in a way that blocks the bullets, while also continuing to threaten anyone within your melee range. I think it's important to separate the Riot Shield's identity from its damage numbers. If the Riot loses a little damage but still performs its role well, that's reasonable. I don't mind a damage nerf. If it loses some mobility but gains better defensive tools, that can also be a fair trade. The problem with Season 11 isn't that the Riot Shield does less damage, it's that the new mechanics work against the way the weapon is designed to be played. Precision rewards keeping your opponent directly in front of your crosshair, but the Riot Shield rewards keeping your shield between yourself and your opponent. These don't work together. In many situations, landing a precise hit requires moving your shield away from the position that you're protecting, center mass, and you're effectively being rewarded for exposing yourself, even though the entire purpose of the shield is to avoid doing that. That's not an issue of player skill, it's a conflict between the weapon's intended identity and the systems that now control melee combat. Once you understand that, the individual balance changes make a lot more sense. So let's look at exactly what changed, beginning with the Riot Shield's primary attack. Okay, now that we've established what the Riot Shield is supposed to do, let's look at the mechanic that changes how it plays. Precision. For anyone who hasn't played this update yet, precision is fairly simple. Every melee weapon now has a defined precision zone on each side of the player crosshair. If your opponent is inside that zone when the attack lands, you deal full damage. But if you're outside of that zone, you deal less damage. Significantly less damage. 57 damage, to be precise. Again, this mechanic isn't inherently bad. For weapons like the sword or the sledgehammer, rewarding accurate swings makes a lot of sense. These weapons are already built around engaging opponents directly, keeping them centered on your screen, and aggressively committing to the fights. But the Riot Shield doesn't work that way. A good Riot player is constantly looking at the opponent's center mass. They aren't doing it. They're constantly adjusting their positioning to keep the shield between themselves and incoming damage, while still providing, threatening space to anyone who comes close. It's not just a melee weapon, but the shield is also your only source of protection, especially on medium, now that the class has been nerfed so badly. Every moment you spend exposing yourself for precise hits, this is a moment where the shield is no longer doing its job. Before the update, good positioning and good defense naturally work together. If you approached correctly, and if you kept your shield between yourself and your opponent, and managed your movement well, you were rewarded for playing the weapon. But now those same fundamentals often result in glancing blows instead of precise hits. The game isn't asking you to become more accurate, it's asking them to choose. It's asking a Riot player to choose between landing precise hits or protecting themselves. And in a competitive sense, you just can't choose between defending yourself and dealing competitive damage that isn't just going to end with you dead. That's a completely different kind of decision. Let's imagine this. Imagine you're approaching someone while bishoping. Your shield is angled correctly, you're closing distance correctly, and you're denying as much incoming damage as possible. Under the old system, this is exactly what you would want to be doing. But under the new system, this same positioning, it often places your opponents outside the precision zone, which leaves you with significantly less damage. To regain your full damage, you have to rotate your body. So instead of having the shield blocking damage, you have to rotate it away to where they can shoot you. This is just not a good system for the Riot Shield. The precision system, it doesn't fail to support the Riot Shield's identity, but it actively punishes the defensive positioning that's always defined the weapon. Once that happens, every other change, the reduced damage, longer time to kill, new bash mechanic, even the stamina system, it starts compounding on top of that problem instead of solving it. So, now that we've established why precision conflicts with the Riot Shield's intended playstyle, let's look at these actual balance changes. The first thing most people noticed was the damage reduction. Before Season 11, the Riot Shield dealt 90 damage with its primary attack. This meant you could eliminate a light in 2 swings, a medium in 3, and a heavy in 4. With the introduction of precision, these numbers changed. A precise hit now deals 82 damage, while a glancing blow only deals 57. This, at first glance, it doesn't look like that much. It's only 8 damage difference, but it completely changes several matchups while in-game. A heavy now survives an additional precise hit, so it increases the Riot Shield's minimum time to kill. That's more than just another swing, because it's another opportunity for them to reposition, or for them to get heals, or another opportunity for their teammates to intervene, and more time for you to make a mistake. The number itself isn't really the takeaway here, though. It's that the Riot Shield also has to remain exposed for longer in order to secure the same elimination that would have taken a lot less last season. Either one of these by themselves wouldn't be a problem. They would be acceptable. But because precision already asks you to expose yourself more than before, the increased time to kill just means that you're exposing yourself more often and for a longer period of time. They reinforce one another rather than canceling. The same issue appears when we start looking at the combo potential of the Riot Shield. Before Season 11, you could weave quick melee attacks into your swings, and this was comboing. It was a reliable way to finish opponents more quickly. It rewarded good timing and helped to offset the Riot Shield's lower damage output. But this is gone this season. Because quick melee deals less damage, and also consumes stamina, and delays your next lunge, and the kick physically pushes opponents farther away from you, using the quick melee makes it harder to continue applying pressure instead of helping you secure the elimination. So the way to play has shifted entirely. Instead of using melee as part of a fluid combo, you're often better off avoiding it entirely until the very end of the engagement, if at all. Even the mathematically optimal combo now, it depends on environmental props, like barrels or furniture, to compensate for the damage breakpoints that were lost. That in itself is another sign that the natural weapon flow has been disrupted because you can't do an optimal combo with just the weapon. It's become slower, sure, but it's also less cohesive. The individual mechanics no longer complement each other the way they did before. Precision changes your positioning, stamina discourages extending combos, quick melee punches push opponents out of your range, and the reduced damage increases the amount of time that you have to remain exposed, and all of these are justified on their own. Don't get me wrong, every change makes sense on its own. But when you put them together for one weapon, they all work against each other and change the rhythm of the weapon itself. There's another aspect of the Riot Shield that doesn't really show up in damage numbers, but I think it's just as important. Let's go over that. At its core, the Riot Shield isn't designed to win fights by overwhelming opponents with damage. It's designed to take control of an area and force opponents to react to you. This is called space. When you're advancing with the shield, they can't ignore you, they have to reposition, create distance, or focus resources on stopping you. Every second they're doing that is space that your teammates can use. That's the real value of the shield. Season 11 doesn't completely remove that identity, but it does weaken it in several ways. The first example is the new shield bash. On paper, I love the idea. Giving Riot Shield more defensive tools fits the weapon's identity, and the ability to interrupt or displace an opponent during steals creates interesting situations. But the problem is how it functions in practice. After using the bash, your target is often pushed outside of your effective melee range, which makes it where you can't immediately follow up to close the gap again. Instead of creating offensive momentum, it just resets the engagement entirely. In many situations, this benefits the gun user more than the Riot user. The opponent's given additional distance, and the Riot user loses the mobility needed to capitalize on that displacement. So it's just an awkward contradiction all over. The mechanic intended to give Riot Shield another option often ends up interrupting its own offense. The same issue appears when looking at the weapon's other defensive improvements. Season 11 made the shield much more consistent at blocking bullets. Shots that previously went through the front of the shield are now blocked. You can no longer shoot feet or tops of the head. That's a good change. It makes the shield behave the way players expect it to, but stronger blocking doesn't make the weapon stronger automatically. It only creates value if it allows you to continue applying pressure. Simply standing still with the shield, it doesn't threaten experienced players. They're just going to reposition and attack from another angle, or they'll just wait until you're forced to lower the shield. It's only dangerous when you're advancing. But this is what bishoping is used for. It's always been a high-level Riot play for a reason. It allows you to block damage while also keeping the movement speed that the block simply does not have. Precision disrupts that movement by forcing you to give up your protection in order to kill your opponent. The bash interrupts this movement because you have to close distance slowly, and once you lunge forward and push them, they're out of your range. The stamina system also slows this movement because if you lunge towards someone and miss, now you have to wait to do it again. Which inherently isn't bad. Individually, none of these are bad. They don't completely remove the Riot Shield's ability to create space, but together, once they compound on top of each other, it just doesn't provide any value to your team. I think that's where the competitive impact becomes most obvious. One of the strengths of the Riot Shield, it's always been its flexibility. A skilled player could pressure isolated opponents, stall objectives, absorb attention, create openings for teammates, clutch situations that looked unwinnable, but many of these options are offensive plays, and they're significantly less reliable in Season 11. The weapon still excels at defensive situations, such as delaying opponents and buying time. It can still stall a cash out, it can still force enemies to commit resources, but these are all defensive strengths. When a weapon loses offensive flexibility and becomes increasingly specialized in one role, I consider that a nerf, even if some of its defensive tools become stronger. Competitive games, and the finals is no different, rewards adaptability. The more predictable a weapon becomes, the easier it is for equally skilled players to counter it. And that's my biggest concern with the Riot Shield this season. It's not unusable. I think it just became more one-dimensional. So, at this point, it might sound like I simply don't like the new melee system, and that's just not true. The melee system benefited the game greatly. I think precision and stamina are amazing things that I think Embark did a great job with. They help a lot of other melee weapons. So let's go through all of the melees, and we're going to start with the sword. The sword, it revolves around aggressive movement. It's all about closing distance, accurately landing attacks. Precision naturally reinforces this. As long as you are precise, you can continue to do so. You can continue closing distance. You can continue pressuring your opponent. But other melee weapons, not quite the case. The Sledgehammer, though, the Sledgehammer is another weapon that came out in a strong position, but for a different reason. Whereas the sword now benefits from aggressive pushing, the Sledgehammer, on the other hand, rewards really good positioning because of its extra damage and the responsiveness of the lunge. It's still slow, but it hits harder, and it rewards people who position themselves well and don't expose themselves to the opponent until they're ready to engage. The spear, on the other hand, the other heavy melee, it has some of the same problems as the Riot Shield, though for entirely different reasons. Its time to kill is increased, and the interaction between stamina and its spin attacks creates situations where missing just is like a game ender. If you are interrupted with something like a winch, it leaves you without the weapon's defining mechanic, the spin. It's still playable, but it's much less forgiving than it was previously. Dual blades are the same way. Dual blades, they're struggling right now. They're not as bad as Riot Shield, but they are still in a rough spot. The ability to transition directly into attacks after the block, this is a nice quality of life improvement. But the charge up time between this is unintuitive. And it often feels like the slower movement coupled with this change, it's like the weapon's defensive mechanics, they interrupt the offense instead of flowing naturally with it. And this is just a problem for melee, like melee in general. If you're going to play defensively, the offensive push has to flow well with the defense. Otherwise, it just feels off. The Dagger is another one that, unfortunately, this update did not solve the Dagger's biggest issue. The Dagger is still heavily reliant on dash, and thanks to the dash's nerf, it is indirectly also a Dagger nerf. The precision changes how the weapon engages, but it doesn't really address the underlying problems with consistency or reliability. If anything, the added reliance on stamina, it makes failed engagements more punishing, which is terrible for the Dagger that already has such a charge-up time. When I look across all of these weapons, there's a clear pattern. All the weapons that are designed around aggressive direct engagement benefit greatly from these new systems. Their mechanics reinforce each other, and precision naturally complements the way they're already meant to be played. Weapons that rely on defense, utility, or maintaining sustained pressure, or positioning, they don't have that same synergy. And I think that's why it's simply not just a discussion about weapon strength, but the identity of the weapon itself. The best balance changes don't make a weapon stronger or weaker, they reinforce what weapons are unique. How are they unique? For Sword and Sledgehammer, I think Season 11 accomplishes that. They are both more skillful, and yet all their mechanics flow together. But for the Riot Shield, I don't think it does. Overall, I think Season 11 is one of the most ambitious updates the Finals has ever received. Embark did a great job with this update. They didn't just do damage values or tweak animations, but they entirely new systems were introduced. And I think that's more difficult than their traditional balancing. And because of that, I don't expect them to have everything perfect on the first attempt. That would be absurd, and I just hope that they tweak things. I think most of these changes are really good, and weapons feel better now. But I think the problem is how they interact with each other. Because Season 11 changes these so much, I feel that Embark needs to go back and look at these weapons, specifically the Riot Shield. Since it's always been a weapon about positioning, pressure, and defense, it doesn't come from dealing high damage, it comes from safely creating space. Since it's rewarded for abandoning this defensive positioning and punished for maintaining defense, and that the defense doesn't flow into offense at all, it results in lower damage and less effective engagements. That's a design conflict because the weapon should be rewarded for doing what it was meant to do. For example, if a system encourages a sword player to aggressively chase precise hits, that's great. That's exactly how the sword is meant to be played. But if that same system punishes a Riot Shield player for protecting themselves with their shield for movement and attack, I think that needs to be improved. That needs to be changed. The Riot Shield doesn't need to become stronger than every other melee weapon. In fact, I don't mind it being worse than every other melee weapon. It always has been. But I believe that they should work together. All these mechanics should work together and complement each other rather than competing with one another and making the Riot Shield's inherent value less. The foundation of the update's strong, and I genuinely believe Embark is moving melee combat in a good direction, but I think the Riot Shield needs another pass so that its unique identity fits naturally with these new systems instead of fighting against them. Of course, these are my thoughts and opinions after spending time with the update. If anyone has had a different experience, or if they've found strategies that address some of these issues, I would love to hear them. The best discussions like these, they come from players looking at these same mechanics from different perspectives, and that helps us to get better. Thank you for watching.